Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating piece of tech architecture that is completely changing how developers think about modern applications. We're going to follow the journey of Johannes Schickling. Now, he's a highly respected engineer and the founder of Prisma. For years, Johannes was deeply entrenched in traditional server-side database tooling. But recently, he made a radical pivot. He moved completely away from the standard web stack to embrace this revolutionary architecture known as local first. So we're going to use the insights from his recent interviews to explore exactly what local first means, why it matters so much, and how it might just be the absolute secret to building software that actually feels good to use. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our agenda for today. First, the Web App Data Bottleneck. Second, the local first paradigm shift. Third, event sourcing versus CRDTs. Fourth, a case study on Overtone music. And finally, under the hood at LiveStore. Section 1, the Web App Data Bottleneck. Let's get right into the universal frustration developers and users face with modern web apps. If you look at the evolution of software architecture over the last few decades, it's basically a giant pendulum swing. Back in the 1990s, computers were mostly unnetworked, right? By definition, all your data had to live right there on your desktop PC. But then, the internet changed everything. We moved into the 2010s, the era of the cloud, where applications became these thin clients. Basically, they're empty shells that rely entirely on a heavy fat server somewhere else to do the thinking and store the data. And yeah, it gave us amazing connectivity, but it cost us speed and reliability. Now looking toward the future, we have the local first architecture. It's almost this back to the future approach, aiming to combine the absolute best of both worlds, the raw speed of local computing with the omnipresence of the cloud.
Let's just contrast these two experiences for a second. The traditional three-tier web stack has a centralized database, an API tier, and a client tier. You click a button, a request travels hundreds of miles to a server, waits for a database, and travels all the way back. It's inherently sluggish. Contrast that with the gold standard, true desktop quality apps. Think of Apple Notes, Figma, or Linear. When you click something in Apple Notes, the action happens instantaneously, whether you're on high-speed Wi-Fi or sitting in airplane mode at 30,000 feet. That immediate zero-latency response, that is exactly what we're chasing here.
So why don't all web apps feel like Apple Notes? Well, the front-end view frameworks we use today, like React, Solid, or Vue, are incredibly powerful, but managing the data remains the ultimate bottleneck. And this bottleneck, it results in terrible user experiences. We get endless loading spinners. We fill out complex forms only to lose everything on an accidental page reload. And fundamentally, the app is entirely at the mercy of server availability and your current internet connection. Section 2, the local first paradigm shift. This is where we fundamentally alter how we think about where our data lives. So the crucial point here is that local first is absolutely not just a fancy buzzword for adding a little offline support to an existing app. It is a radical architectural departure. It literally shifts the data bottleneck away from a distant server and places it right onto the user's client device. The primary data store lives on your computer or phone. This shift is what enables those ultra-high performance responsive experiences and ensures true data ownership. Basically, you never lose your work just because some server goes down. But, as Johannes Schickling wisely points out, this isn't magic, you guys. It's engineering. To quote him directly, if you're building Google Maps, you have very different trade-offs compared to if you're building Airbnb. Local first is not some silver bullet that fits every single project perfectly. It represents a whole spectrum of architectural trade-offs that completely depend on what your specific application is trying to achieve. To really ground this abstract concept, let's compare those two exact examples. If you're building an app like Google Maps, the user's priority is knowing where they are, even in a total dead zone. So offline pre-caching is absolutely vital, making the local first fit incredibly high. But if you're building an app like Airbnb, your priority is real-time global inventory. You literally cannot double book a cabin in the woods just because someone's app was offline, right? In that scenario, local first might have a lower fit, or at least require vastly different architectural trade-offs. Evaluating these user experience benefits upfront is just so critical. Section 3, event sourcing versus CRTs. Once you decide to go local first, you're looking at two main technological paths. Think of these as the yin and yang of local first technology. On one hand, we have CRDTs, conflict-free replicated data types, with popular frameworks like AutoMerge. These are absolute superpowers when it comes to collaborative conflict resolution. Imagine multiple people editing a Figma file or a Google Doc at exactly the same time. On the other hand, we have event sourcing, Rather than just storing the current state of your data, event sourcing stores every single change as an event. This offers an incredibly robust history and perfectly tracks exactly how your data evolves over time. Both are totally valid paths depending on what you're building. Now, Johannes Schickling actually chose event sourcing for his projects for a pretty revealing reason. He joked in his interview about having what he called technological trauma from his days building Prisma, specifically when it came to database migrations. Evolving database schemas over time is notoriously painful for developers. By utilizing client-side event sourcing, Johannes realized he could bypass a ton of this pain. You aren't constantly rewriting the schema. You're just appending new events to the log.
Section 4, Case Study on Overtone Music. Let's shift from abstract theory into a concrete, real-world application.
So Johannes actually used to be a DJ, and he really misses the pride of having a true music collection, rather than just renting access from streaming giants. So he built Overtone. Now, Overtone isn't about hosting the audio files, it's a third-party client layered right on top of external sources like Spotify. The true innovation here is giving users ultimate, localized control over a ridiculously rich, user-defined metadata and tagging layer. This approach builds a uniquely specialized product. Audio files are notoriously demanding. We've all got that one friend who insists you listen to music through absurdly expensive silver cabling to catch the nuance, right? Well, Overtone applies that exact level of obsession to data. Johannes wanted to introduce his own localized, highly responsive, custom tagging system. To facilitate a schema that is expressed by the end user and not the developer, he needed a data foundation that was uncommonly powerful. But building a client on top of an external catalog introduces a massive data integration problem. I mean, what happens when Spotify suddenly removes a catalog track? In a normal thin client app, the track disappears. And all those beautiful custom tags and annotations you spent hours creating, they just vanish into the void.
This is where it gets really clever. Because Overtone is built on local first principles and event sourcing, it uses something called Tombstone metadata. Because all of your tagging actions were recorded locally as events, you retain your local tags and annotations for an item even after the external source file has been completely removed by the streaming giant. You keep your valuable custom data regardless of what happens up in the cloud. You truly own your data.
Section 5. Under the Hood with LiveStore. Let's explore the specific open-source foundation Schickling built to actually make Overtone possible.
And this brilliantly illustrates the technical leap required to make this whole thing work. LiveStore was built on two core innovations. Step 1. Take SQLite, a fast, incredibly reliable local database, and make it highly reactive and fast enough to run directly in the front-end thread of the web application. Step 2. Combine that hyper-fast local database with a sync engine that fully embraces client-side event sourcing to communicate with the rest of the world.
LiveStore actually evolved from an MIT research project called Riffle, which was built alongside researchers Nicholas Schiefer and Jeffrey Litt. Today, LiveStore is this really exciting emerging open-source alternative to CRDT frameworks like AutoMerge. It provides beautiful reactive views for front-end frameworks, and most importantly, it keeps your data portable, secure, and locally incredibly fast. It's a huge step forward for the broader web development community looking to build these hyper-responsive apps.
So, I want to wrap up this explainer with a vital question for any developers watching right now. Does your app's user experience actually justify the architectural complexity of going local first? Because radically changing where your data lives and how it flows is honestly one of the hardest things you can do. But if you want to deliver that magical zero-latency desktop experience on the web, well, it just might be a paradigm shift you absolutely have to make. Think about that for your next project. Thanks so much for joining me to explore the source material today, and I'll see you on the next explainer.